should is could with shame attached, right? If you're putting all of this pressure on yourself for the things that you think you should be doing, and they're not realistic things to expect yourself to do, you're going to feel bad, right? And then you add in the layer of comparison, right? You see people getting book deals. You see people getting TV and movie deals based on their book deals. You see people producing prolifically and seeming to have a really good time with it. And you're like, what is wrong with me that I can't do these things as well? And so it just becomes this really toxic, like, source of shame that gets attached to the writing.
Welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast with Mike Brennan. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. I am your host, Mike Brennan, and this is the podcast where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. And I love to unpack these things mostly with my guests and explore how we can apply these things to our own creative processes and journeys. Now, I would love to also invite you to subscribe to the Daily Creative Habit email newsletter. Nobody needs more emails, I get that. But this email that I send out once a week is packed with some inspiration, some resources. I give daily creative prompts for you if you're looking for something to get you out of the rut, to kind of get the juices flowing. Perfect for you. Also, we have a community over on Facebook that is called Daily Creative Habit as well. And I would love for you just to be taking a step to be a part of that community. Come around people who are like-minded, raising their hands to say, I want to show up more consistently for my creativity and craft. So if that's you, head on over to dailycreativehabit.com and you'll find all those resources there. Hey, I'd also love to invite you to check out my book, Make Fun a Habit. It's the creative playbook for making life and work fun again. If you have felt like fun has up and left the building somewhere along the way, I think we all do at some point, you find yourself centering around some practicality and responsibility and all the adulting words. If you need a little bit more fun in your life, in your work, in your experience, then I want to invite you to grab a copy of my book. It's 30 short chapters that give you some inspiration, some practical application, and exercises so that you can start to experience some more fun in and around your life. Go to makefunahabit.com and grab your copy today. Every so often you come across someone who is doing some things that are similar to you, or there's a certain synergy. And that is the case with today's guest. Dr. Bailey Lang is the founder of The Writing Desk, where she provides writing, editing, and coaching services. And she works one-on-one to help authors build sustainable, enjoyable writing practices and habits to get their books from draft to done. And we have a great conversation today talking about all things habits and even talking about the shame that sometimes comes around our creativity. So you're not going to want to miss this episode. Be sure to take some notes and listen in for the end, because Bailey shares about a challenge that she is inviting you to, specifically for you writers out there. If you're looking to get more into a habit, into some consistency, and alongside some other writers, pay attention to this challenge and be sure to follow the links at the end of this episode. Without further ado, here is my creative chat with Bailey Lang. Well, Bailey, welcome to the Creative Chats Podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm really, really excited to chat with you.
Yes. You know, it's been fun just to get to know you a little bit from past weeks of us just getting connected through ConvertKit, the email provider that we both use and platform, and how they have invested in their creator network. And it's given opportunity for creative people like you and me to just come and connect and talk about what we do and just see where there's some synergy and overlap and collaboration. And so I love that they're doing that. I love that that led into us talking more and developing more of this relationship where now, you know, you've profiled me and I'm now you're on my podcast. And so kind of everybody wins. And I think that's really the way that it should be with creativity. I always say I champion community over competition any day, and I think together we
Yes,
rise.
same. Yeah,
So
absolutely. And creativity is not a limited resource. There is a lot of it to go around.
exactly, exactly. So before we get too deep into some things, I always love to just ask my guest and say, you're at a party, you're at a maybe a networking event. Someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, who are you? What do you do?" Like, what's your answer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Bailey Lang. I run a company called The Writing Desk. I am a writer, editor, and coach, and I work with businesses and authors to tell stories that matter and to build sustainable, enjoyable writing habits.
Yes, and that last part in particular is certainly something close to my heart. The sustainable habits, right? Um, that has been something that's part of my own journey as well. So I'm curious to get into what that looks like for you in a little bit. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
can you dial us back to like childhood days? What did creativity look like for you? Was this a writing thing? Was this more than writing? Like, what kind of activities did you find yourself involved with?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, we can go way back. So I think
Yeah.
my mom still has this somewhere when like you're in kindergarten, first grade-ish, and they're like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And mine was an artist and a paleontologist.
Nice.
So that, like that's where my head was at when I was a really little kid. I've always loved to read. I've always loved to write. And as I've gotten further along in my career, I did not become a paleontologist, but I have done a lot of archival research. So it's similar. There's a lot of excavation that you have to do. So those threads are all there. But yeah, I was always big into reading, writing, telling stories. I remember my first grade teacher had this like book station where you could like she'd give you pieces of paper, you could write a story, and then you would bind it and you could decorate the cover. And it was just like the coolest thing to be like, I can come up with this stuff and then turn it into a real thing that someone else can read. Like it's magic. It's still magic. I still believe that's magic.
Yeah, that sounds like the early stages of self-publishing, right?
Yes.
It's they give you
Yeah.
the opportunity to do it right there, and hand it out to people. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was
What
really
kind of
fun.
yeah, what kind of stories did you find yourself gravitating towards, and like why?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a good question. So I read everything. I enjoy all kinds of topics. If you look at, I use Storygraph to track my reading. It's a really fun app, gives you a lot of graphs and stuff.
Hmm.
Sci-fi fantasy is kind of my home base. Like I read, that's the genre that I go to for comfort, for escapism, whatever I need. I've always gravitated towards dragons and spaceships. That's just a fun environment. I really love world building. I love the characters that you find in those types of stories. So that's a lot of the work that I read just for fun during the off time.
Mm, mm. And has that led into you just exploring some of those things more for your own purposes of writing too? Like if, some of those themes, have they worked their way into a lot of the things you do?
Yeah, so my own writing, I have written stories. I've had some fiction published, not a ton and not as much in recent years. I've kind of shifted my attention mostly to nonfiction and more academic stuff, just sort of the career shift. But in the last couple of years, I've started kind of dipping my toes back into some fiction, and it's definitely like fantasy settings are always really interesting to me. I love the world building that you can do there. So I've got some projects in various states of, development that when
Sure.
I have a little bit of time, and I'm not doing my normal writing practices, that's something that I turn to as like, this is just for fun. Like it's
Hmm.
just something that I kind of noodle with. And that's a
Yeah.
that's a really good time.
Yeah, I always encourage people to have like what I call passion projects, right? Those are the things that no one else can touch it because it's not like it's based on a client or a committee or somebody else's budget, right? It's the stuff
Hmm.
that you're like, you know what? I get to decide what happens over there, and I
Yeah.
get to break some things and experiment and play around and just follow some of the curiosity I may have and see where it leads me. I think it's important to have those places because those are typically the places where you might have some breakthroughs, right? You might have some opportunity to do something that's outside the norm of your day to day, right? I mean, has that been your experience?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And when there's no pressure, you feel more free to just play with stuff. And like you said, follow your curiosity, try something a little offbeat, do something a little bit unusual, and just see what happens. And if you're like, wow, that was terrible, okay, right? Like
Yeah.
it didn't
Yeah.
work, but you learned something, right? And
Exactly.
there's no negative consequences. You know, nobody's gonna come after you like this is awful. So it's really helpful to have a space where you can just be playful. And that doesn't mean you're not still working really hard and doing really good work, but having the pressure kind of taken off a project like that, yeah, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So as you're coming up and you're deciding like, okay, you're not necessarily going to be the paleontologist, right? But you're deciding, okay, career direction, school direction, education, right? What does that point look like for you? Is it like, hey, writing, I'm going all in. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, so I did get my undergraduate degree was in creative writing. So that was at Ohio University in Athens, and I had a really good time getting that degree. Met a lot of really cool writers. You know, did a lot of really good writing. I had a few stories published during that time, and then I graduated and was like, oh, I never really thought about the job part of this.
Right.
So I ended up getting a job. I did phone interviews at a recruitment process outsourcing company. So I was doing phone interviews for like really, really big companies that didn't want to do their initial phone screenings. They outsourced them to this place. And then after about a year of that, I got hired on full time in their marketing department. And that felt like, oh, this is a space where all of my creative writing skills are actually really, really useful. They need someone who can come in and say, okay, what's an interesting way to present this information to an existing client, a potential client. So that was a really fun job. I did that for 5 or 6 years. And then I was also working on a master's degree while I was in that job. And that was in rhetoric and writing studies, which is not creative writing, but not creative writing. It encompasses a little bit of everything. This always drove my husband crazy because he'd be like, "What is it that your field does?" I was like, "Whatever you want." That's why it's fun. So by the time I finished that degree, I was super in love with my field and I had fallen fully out of love with my job. So I decided at that point to go on and get the PhD. So I left my job. I did the PhD full time, and that was kind of the educational path, just getting further and further and further into really, really nerdy writing stuff.
Yeah. And then so from there, like how how did you see opportunity come to you because of the education and I'm sure like the network that you had surrounded yourself with at that point?
hmm Yeah, so I started freelancing actually while I was in the PhD program. I don't know how much you know about stipends for graduate students in the humanities, but they're very small. It's not
Okay.
enough money to live on. And I did not want to go into debt during my degree program. I didn't want to take out loans. So I just started picking up a lot of freelance gigs. It was a lot of writing, a lot of editing. And by the time I was done with my degree and realized, like, I don't think academia is really where I want to spend my career, I had already a bank of companies that I was working with, people that I was working with, and ideas that I felt like I could act on. So at that point, I told my husband, I was like, look, give me a year. Like, let me see if I can make some money doing this. If I can at least replace my stipend in this first year, I think this is viable. On top of like what I was already making. I was like, if after a year I'm not making any money or I hate it and we're both miserable or whatever, I was like, I'll go back on the job market. I'll look for something else. That was in 2021. And here we still are. So far, I'd say it's working.
Yeah, yeah. Love that. And you know, I think it's important to underscore this, you know, everyone thinks, you know, if I'm going to pursue my creativity for a living, that it's going to look a certain way. It has to fit this mold. It has to be in this time frame. It has to, like there's all these parameters we attach ourselves to it. And I love that you approached it with a sense of like, this is what you're doing, but you're also like giving yourself the runway of going, we're going to see if this works. We're going to see if I even like to do this. We're going to see if this works financially. Like there are some real world parameters that you needed to work within, and that needed to align for you. And I think giving yourself that, so that you have something to know whether or not it's quote successful, right, is really important. So I appreciate you being, just sharing that part of it as well. Can you talk a little bit about like, how did that transition into you helping other people and being a coach and some of the things you do now with the writing desk?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that came out of both my time in marketing and the work that I was doing in my PhD program. So I realized the thing that I love the most, the thing that like I could do this all day, is helping other people solve writing problems. And those are often related to habits. And that's something that I've uncovered through my own research, through research that I've read, and through working with clients. And it just so happens that I am super interested in habits, habit formation, and behavior change. So it's a really natural fit. But it brings kind of all of those things that I've learned through both of those different career paths into a place that helps me feel like I'm doing work that feels really good for me and that makes a real difference for the writers that I'm working with. And it's always under development. I'm always working on, new things to try and new experiments. That's kind of my approach to everything, is like, this is an experiment. Let's try it and see what happens,
Yes.
and then we'll adjust. And that's been really successful. It's been very rewarding. But yeah, it brings a lot of my interests and background into a space and a container that feels really supportive and sustainable for me as well, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to make sure that you're, especially when you're creating something for yourself in the work that you're doing, right? You're your own boss, that you don't create something that doesn't serve you, that just simply meets needs of other people, because then it's only going to last so long because you're not invested in it. It's not fulfilling work for you, right? And I'm curious to know, like, since you've mentioned habits, and that's of course my jam as well. What personally have you seen as far as the power of a habit shaping your whether it's writing or even just your life in general?
Yeah, I mean, habits are everywhere. They're in everything. We don't often think about them explicitly unless, it's like the new year and we're trying to like brute force some new habits.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, habits, they dictate so much of what we do automatically. So just like I get up in the morning, I make a cup of tea, right? Like that's a habit. I don't think about that every step of the way. Like I get up and I'm like, oh, it's time for tea. So that, they're everywhere, they're in everything. And with writing, habits are so foundational. And they're also such a source of shame and frustration for so many writers that I talk to who feel like they don't have the habits they should have. They don't like the habits that they do have. There's a lot of really kind of aggressively judgmental language in certain areas of like writing advice about how you ought to get writing done. And so all of that kind of comes into the work that I do with people. And it informs my own writing practices as well. So I really try to practice what I preach with that. I treat all of my writing projects as experiments. I modify my habits. I do a lot of reflective work. All of that. It's helpful because I never want to tell people like my way is the right way, right? Because nobody else lives my life. I don't live somebody else's life. You need to figure out what works for you. But it's so hard to do that if you don't know what the fundamentals of a habit are. And you don't know how to really build in the structure that will support the change that you want to make. So those are things that I'm thinking about all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious your answer to this question because I know when I deal with this with people too, if someone's resistant, right? Because either first off, they're like, creativity and habits. I mean, that seems like the furthest things from each other, right? Like habits are boring. They're,
Uh-huh.
routine, like, oh, I want to be free. I want to be, I want to, follow the muse, all that stuff. Um, what do you say to someone who is struggling with the idea of habits?
Yeah, that is one of, I think, if not the most common things that people are struggling with when they're like, I need to wait to feel motivated. And, the muse has abandoned me. That's, like the inspiration isn't coming and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And what I tell those people is like, fundamentally, we tend to misunderstand motivation and habits. Motivation, and this is so BJ Fogg does excellent work
Mhm.
on habits. I know we've talked about liking his work, and he has this thing where he talks about motivation is the friend you want to take to a party. It is not the friend you're going to ask to pick you up at the airport because it's unreliable.
Yeah.
Like it ebbs and flows, it comes in waves. Sometimes, like for me last week, I was super motivated to work on a bunch of different development ideas I had. I was very excited. And I was like, cool, I'm going to seize this while I've got it, get a bunch of stuff down, and then make myself a to-do list from it because I know when Monday rolls around, I'm going to be tired. And I'm not going to feel like doing these 80 things that right now all seem like the coolest idea I've ever had in my life. I
Yeah.
need I need a path and I need some structure. I need a habit so that I'm continually working on this and not waiting for that burst of energy to come back because that could be months, right? You can't force that, you can't predict it. But habits are reliable. If you show up and put in the work, you're going to see the results. And it's not as sexy as like, oh, I had this, lightning bolt of inspiration and then I stayed up all night and wrote this my magnum opus kind, like, but that's a myth. Like that almost
Hmm.
never ever happens and it's not sustainable. So habits, they may not seem like the flashy, cool, instant gratification thing, but they're going to get you further.
Yeah.
You'll get more
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, for sure. And that's been my experiences too. It's interesting too, because as my journey has evolved, I think if you're like me at all, I like to take stock of what's happening with me, right? I like to journal a lot and just process and go like, well, where have I been? Where am I going? That kind of stuff. And I don't know that I ever early on identify that process was something that was so important to me. I think it was more intuitive, and I
Hmm.
think that it was something that I knew if I had violated a process or didn't have a process for something that it wasn't going to end well. Um, but I didn't really understand the importance of it for the longest time. And then when I finally did and started to go like, oh, yeah, like that's really the thing that I talk about when I talk about habits and routines and whether that's for visual art, which is my background, or other forms of creativity, it's
Hmm.
really this process. That's what daily creative habit, is all about, is sharing the process that I uncovered on my own journey and helping other people embrace that. And like you said, not in a sense of like, well, this is the only way. This is,
Mm.
what was true for me in my experience, but simply giving some people some handles to go like, look, at least try this, at least do something, because if you're, it's probably more than what you're doing right now anyway.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
let's get moving and let's start to discover some stuff on your own path and journey. Can you maybe share some examples of how you've seen the work that you've done with people, with clients, and maybe there's a difference between the business side and on the personal side, like of how you approach coaching someone along to so that habits take root.
Yeah. So much of it has to be customized, right? Like I'm very much not a one size fits all type of person because there are so many ways that you can build a habit, especially a writing habit. There's a gazillion things that you can do. Like I know you and I have talked about with your book, you went on walks and, you used the notes feature and like jotted stuff down that way. And people use voice recordings and write at a certain time of day or don't write at a certain time of day. Maybe they said a word, there's a million different things you can try. So some of it is just really talking to people about what their life actually looks like. How much time do you actually have? And how much of that time do you want to devote to this project? Mm-hmm. Because we often have this ideal writer self in mind. We're like, oh, I have all day, every day to write. I have all the time in the world. I'll devote hours and hours to this. And in reality, maybe you have kids or a chronic illness. You're caring for your parents and pets and a house. You have a job. Like, life will get in the way of that ideal writer self. So a lot of it is bringing it back to what's going to work for your life right now and maybe for the next few months. And then we need to revisit it and say, okay, what's changed? What's going to work for the next few months? And that has been really, really effective for a lot of people because a lot of advice that you see is just like, butt in chair, fingers on keyboard. And it's very like brute force, willpower, bully yourself into writing or you're not doing it right. And I think that backfires. I don't think you can shame yourself into writing. You certainly can't shame yourself into enjoying writing. And if you don't enjoy it, the odds of you doing it go way down. So a lot of it is just like, how do we make this feasible for your life as it is? And how do we make this feel good? How do we make this something that you are excited about doing? And that after you've done it, you're like, yeah, that felt good. And some of that is like nervous system work. So especially for people who are kind of caught in that, I have to wait for motivation and then I'm going to burn myself out and then I'm not going to touch the project for 6 months. That is a really, really tough cycle to break out of. Because our nervous systems get used to that. And then when you try to do like, I'm just going to do a little bit at a time more regularly, it feels different. It feels weird. Our bodies go, oh no, we're doing something different. This feels weird. So it's probably bad. And then we self-sabotage. And then you're caught in that loop of, well, I guess I can only write, if have this burst of inspiration or if I have this last minute panic. And people feel so much shame about that when the reality is like they've never had anyone talk to them about how do you make your body feel comfortable with trying a different writing habit? Like how do you really give yourself all of the scaffolding that you need to do this long term so that it doesn't require you to have all of the willpower, all of the, like you don't have to be a drill sergeant about it. It's not going to work. It needs to feel good. And that has been really, really effective for the people that I've worked with.
Yeah. You've mentioned a word a couple of times so far, and I'd love to poke on this a little bit more and dive deeper. Shame. What has been your experience in dealing with people in working with shame? Like, what is it about this process or what is it about us approaching the work that leads to this sense of shame?
Yeah, I think it's when we expect something of ourselves and we know, like you sit down to work on any creative project and it's never quite going to be what you wanted it to be, right? There's always going to be the project that you imagined and then the project you created. So there's already a gap there and we know that's going to happen. And so that can be intimidating because what if your expectations and your capabilities are currently really far apart? That can be very scary, right? That can feel very, very frustrating and embarrassing to be like, I had this cool idea and I sat down to write it and it just didn't turn out. So there's that part of it. And like, I think no matter what you're creating, that's a pretty common experience. Then you have I should be able to do this every day, do this for hours and hours without a break, produce without needing to revise, which I would love to meet the person for whom that is true because I have yet to meet them. But there are all of these shoulds about writing. And I forget who said this, but it's should is could with shame attached, right? If you're putting all of this pressure on yourself for the things that you think you should be doing, and they're not realistic things to expect yourself to do, you're going to feel bad, right? And then you add in the layer of comparison, right? You see people getting book deals. You see people getting TV and movie deals based on their book deals. You see people producing prolifically and seeming to have a really good time with it. And you're like, what is wrong with me that I can't do these things as well? And so it just becomes this really toxic, like, source of shame that gets attached to the writing, which then makes it really hard to write, because why would you want to do something that makes you feel bad?
Yeah.
Even if you're like, I have this story, I think it's really cool. I think it really matters that this is out in the world. If you feel bad when you sit down in front of the blank page, it's going to be a million times harder to put any words there.
Yeah. It's so hard for us as creative people to give ourselves the grace with our own experiences and journeys and expectations. We often treat ourselves in a way that we would never dare treat someone else. And that self-talk is so important. And I think, when it comes to shame, that sense of I should, right? That just rams through the door, right? Because there's a sense of like, okay, let's take it out of the creativity world for a minute and go, I should go to the gym. I know that I should go. It's something that I have all the information that tells me why I should do this, how I'll be healthier, how I'll live longer, et cetera, et cetera. I'll feel better, right? And yet, if I'm not doing it and I'm saying that I want to do it, there's this disconnect. And then it becomes something else that feels like it needs to fit onto my to-do list, which then adds pressure. And if I'm not really that in love with the idea in the first place, it's really easy to just go, it's going to stay on that list that keeps getting shuffled from day to day to day to day. And I'm never really going to take action on it because it's really not that important to me. And the problem I've seen also is that, like, sometimes people have this idea of what their creativity should look like. They zero in on a specific skill set or a specific modality, and that may not actually be where they end up if they kept pursuing things, right? It could be adjacent to something else, right? So let's say maybe they pushed into some visual art and then they realized that as they're doing that, oh, there's a form of visual art that actually is not painting, but maybe it's actually video. Maybe it's actually animation. And I needed the process to work through to get from one experience to the other so that that's actually the thing that feels more aligned with who I am and what I want to do. And now, because I know what that thing is, I can actually be more invested in getting there, because it's not simply, well, I should do this because I know that, yeah, I'll be, quote, more creative, or yeah, I'll, put some work out into the world that wouldn't go there otherwise. Like there are a lot of things that I think people can very easily dismiss, but when you get curious about something that you're really feeling more invested in, I think it's harder to deny. I mean, have you seen that at work with some of the folks you work with, where they maybe object to the process or the should thing, they get caught in that, but realize like, oh, it's actually because I really do love this thing, and helping them overcome those steps.
Oh yeah, that's a huge part of it. If the shame and the shoulds are what's keeping you from the project, a lot of the work is about like unpacking that, right? What's going on there? Why are these things coming up for you? And how do we rebuild this so that it feels good? And that's, that I think is really at the core of a lot of what keeps people from their creativity. And like you said, with it's really easy to put something on that list of like, yeah, I should do this. This might be fun sometime, or this would be interesting, or this would be really important, maybe down the line. And if there's no one who knows about it, if there's no one that you are accountable to, and not in like a you're going to get fired if you don't do this kind of way, but just like someone who can give you a little nudge now and then, like, hey, are you working on this? Um, it's really easy for the things that you are probably most passionate about, that align most closely with your values and what you want to contribute. If you don't have any of the other scaffolding, you can very easily push those aside forever and be like, well, I have to focus on the work. I've got to do all this other stuff. Everything else comes first. It's so, so easy to lose sight of the creative work, but that's so often what makes everything else feel even more worth doing too. Like it just adds something to life that is missing otherwise. And it makes me really sad when I am talking to writers who are like, yeah, I've had this idea for years and I just am not touching it. I can't seem to get myself going on it. And so a lot of the work is breaking through that wall.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering too, if you might be willing to share, what are some just habits that you have that help your creativity that maybe you formed a while ago, maybe they've evolved over time, but things that you return to again and again that help you stay sharp?
Yeah. So for me, consistency is huge. And I try to write every day. But I also don't always hit that target. That's my goal. My ideal is every day. But I also know like I have other stuff going on. That means sometimes I can't hit it every single day. So I give myself that grace, and that helps me if I miss a day, pick up the next day and get started again. So that's been really useful. But the consistency is huge. Like consistency and small targets. I'm not trying to write 30 pages a day or something. Like when I was writing my dissertation, this was an enormous project, huge, huge project, very long term. And my process was every morning during the week, I'm going to spend 2 to 3 hours working on this. And that might be data analysis. That might be rereading a source. That might be putting words on the page. But that's my target, is those few hours a day. And then I'm done. And I don't have to touch it again until the next day. And I got my dissertation done in a year, which is not always how it goes for folks. So the consistency has worked really, really well for me. Another huge, huge important thing is community. Having other people, whether or not they're working in the same medium as you, but having other people that you can touch base with on your creative projects, who can give you advice, give you feedback, give you encouragement, and hold you accountable to the things that you said you were going to do. Enormous. I'm in a writing group now. We meet once a month. Like we give each other feedback. It's amazing. When I was working on my dissertation, I was in 2 dissertation writing groups. So having other people around you who are also working on creative projects, enormously helpful. You will learn so much, you will give so much, and it makes it so much more fun. It's just really enjoyable to talk to other people about their work. And that makes you feel like, okay, well, they're doing this cool thing. Now I feel better about my thing. And I want to have something to show them next time, right? So it creates a really positive feedback loop. Consistency, community, collaboration has also been really fun. So this is a newer thing that my husband and I are doing, actually. Back in December, he was like, I have this weird idea for a story. And he's like, I don't know, like it's weird. I don't know, but he kept talking about it. And I was like, okay, let's sit down and try to write it together. Like, let's figure. So we have all these Google Docs with all these notes, and we were trying, like, how do we want to set this up and frame it? And like, what do we want to do? And we have all this research. And it is the most fun writing fiction that I have had in probably a decade. So not all collaboration has to look like you're working on a shared project. It can be writing together in the same space, or, being critique partners, getting that feedback, but getting that energy from other people, that it makes you want to create more, and it makes creating more fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I can, as you're listing those things out, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I'm totally in agreement with all those things. And those have been part of my experience and process and habits as well. As people are listening to this, if they're thinking like, hey, I would love to take part in something that you offer. Can you tell people a little bit more about just how they can get in touch with you and how basically you can come alongside and help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to find me, my website is usetherewritingdesk.com. It's USE, the writing desk, all one word. So there you can find out more about the writing, editing, and coaching services that I offer. I'm also so you can sign up for my newsletter there. That's probably the best way to stay in touch with me. That comes out a few times a month. That has all sorts of tips and tricks for building better writing habits, exercising your creativity. And then once a month, I interview an author like you. You will be featured in the newsletter soon. So that's a really great resource as well for just new books to read and new people to follow. And then starting in April, I will be running a 30-day writing challenge. So the goal is to write 15,000 words in April in little daily chunks. Like none of the days are terrifying, I promise. It's going to be really fun. I'm very excited about that. That is you'll get an email every day with your writing goal. There will be some weekly stuff about different writing habits to try. And then there will be a live co-writing session every Wednesday in April. So people can come and get some of that camaraderie and community and write together. So I'm really excited about that.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. I just did a 30-day challenge a couple of months ago too. And just, giving people some just parameters to work within and some kind of guidance, I think really helps people get some traction. And, the funny thing is I had a few people who were like, hey, I didn't get through all 30 days. I maybe did half. And they started to go on this road where they were like beating themselves up. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, do you realize that you did half? Like, that's more than what you would have done normally. Like, yes. Celebrate that. Like, yeah. I get that the goal may be to do something every single day. And that was my goal. And I did that for so long, whatever. But consistency can look different for different people. And I think as long as we're showing up, choosing ourselves, doing the work, putting the work in, we're going to see things start to change. We're going to see some momentum start building. And then we can start to ride that a little bit of, it doesn't feel so heavy all the time. It doesn't feel like I need an hour to get my head right to be able to sit down and get into the game. So I love that you're providing these resources. I love that you have this challenge going, and highly recommend that if someone is looking to develop more writing skills, or they're looking to be more consistent or be in a community for writers, certainly, take you up on this offer, get in that orbit and start to just be around some like-minded people, because I think, together we rise, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for our time today. I mean, I love talking about all these things that we've talked about. It's near and dear to my heart as well. Like I said, I know we have a lot of overlap in our areas of interest and just even some experiences and the things that we talk about, and how we just approach it with our own sense of creativity and our own experiences. I mean, I love that there's room for everybody at this table, and we're just saying, hey, come on, we need even more. We need more people at this table. So let's have the most incredible party ever.
I love it. Yes, that sounds like a blast. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.